The autumn leaves crunched beneath Robert's worn shoes as he walked slowly up the brick pathway. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cool October air, but from the weight of what he was about to do. After 3 years of silence, he was finally going to see his son David again. Robert paused at the front door of the suburban house, taking in the perfect lawn and pristine white shutters. This was the life David had built without him, the success his son had achieved through his own hard work and determination. Robert felt a surge of pride mixed with deep regret. He had been a difficult father, he knew that now. Too focused on his own struggles, too proud to admit when he was wrong, too stubborn to bend when David needed him most. Their last argument had been bitter and final, or so it seemed. Words had been said that couldn't be taken back. Doors had been slammed. Years had passed in stubborn silence, but yesterday everything changed. Robert had received the wedding invitation in the mail, addressed in David's careful handwriting. His son was getting married next month, and somehow, despite everything, David still wanted his father there. Robert straightened his shoulders and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached, but when the door opened, it wasn't David who stood there. A tall, elegant woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothes looked him up and down with barely concealed disgust. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cold and dismissive. "I'm here to see David," Robert said quietly. "I'm his father." The woman's expression shifted from confusion to something closer to horror. This was clearly not what she had expected. Robert was aware of how he must look to her. His clothes were clean but old, his shoes scuffed, his coat patched in several places. He had done his best to dress nicely for this visit. But his best wasn't much. "David isn't here right now," she said, starting to close the door. "Please," Robert said, placing his hand gently on the door frame. "I just want to talk to him. I'm his father." "I know who you are," the woman snapped. Her name was Victoria, though Robert didn't know it yet. "David told me all about you. How you embarrassed him his whole life. How you held him back with your limitations." Each word hit Robert like a physical blow, but he stood his ground. "I know I made mistakes. I just want to make things right." Victoria looked around nervously, as if the neighbors might see this shabby old man at her door. "David has moved on. He has a good life now, a successful career. He doesn't need reminders of where he came from." "Where he came from?" Robert's voice carried a note of hurt confusion. "I'm his father. I raised him after his mother died. I worked 3 jobs to put him through college." "And look how you raised him," Victoria said cruelly. "He had to overcome everything you taught him to become the man he is today. Do you think I want my friends to meet you at our wedding? Do you think I want people to know that David comes from this?" Robert felt his heart breaking, but there was something else rising in his chest, too. A quiet dignity that had carried him through years of struggle and hardship. "I may not have much money," he said softly, "but I loved that boy with everything I had. I sacrificed everything for him." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sacrifice? You mean you held him back?" Thank goodness he was smart enough to rise above his raising. "Now I think you should leave before David gets home. He doesn't need this kind of stress right now." "Please," Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. "He invited me to the wedding. He sent me this." He pulled the invitation from his coat pocket with shaking hands. Victoria snatched it away and looked at it with surprise. This must have been a mistake. David would never have sent this without discussing it with me first. She tore the invitation in half and let the pieces flutter to the ground. "There, problem solved." Robert stared at the torn pieces of paper at his feet. Each piece represented a hope he had carried for weeks, a dream of reconciliation with the son he loved more than his own life. "I'm your father," he said again, more to himself than to her. The words came out as almost a cry, full of pain and bewilderment. "Not anymore," Victoria said firmly. "David has a new family now. He has me, and soon we'll have children who will grow up properly with advantages. He doesn't need the baggage of his past holding him down." Just then, a car pulled into the driveway. David stepped out wearing a tailored suit and carrying a briefcase. He looked successful and confident, every inch the professional man he had become. But when he saw his father standing on his doorstep, his face went completely white. "Dad?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, son," Robert said, his own voice thick with emotion. Victoria quickly moved to David's side, her hand possessive on his arm. "Darling, I was just explaining to your father that this isn't a good time. He was just leaving." But David was staring at the torn pieces of the wedding invitation on the ground. His face cycled through confusion, realization, and then something that looked like growing anger. "What happened to the invitation?" David asked quietly. "It was obviously sent by mistake," Victoria said quickly. "You never mentioned inviting him." David looked at his father, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years. He saw the careful way Robert had dressed for this visit, the hope in his tired eyes, the dignity with which he stood despite Victoria's obvious cruelty. "I sent that invitation," David said slowly, "and I meant every word I wrote in it." Victoria's perfect composure began to crack. "David, surely you can see that having him at our wedding would be inappropriate. Think about what people will say." David knelt down and carefully gathered the pieces of the torn invitation. When he stood up, his face was set in hard lines that reminded Robert powerfully of the determined little boy David had once been. "Victoria," David said quietly, "I think you need to apologize to my father." "Apologize?" Victoria's voice rose in disbelief. "For what?" "For treating the man who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, like he was something to be ashamed of." David's voice was getting stronger. "For forgetting that everything I am, everything I've accomplished, started with the love and values he gave me." Victoria looked between father and son, seeing something in David's expression that she had never seen before. A line had been drawn, and she had placed herself on the wrong side of it. Robert watched his son with growing pride and amazement. This was the boy he had raised, the man he had always known David could become, not because he had money or success, but because he had character. "Son," Robert said softly, "you don't need to choose. If she makes you happy." "She does," David interrupted, looking at Victoria with an expression that mixed love with disappointment. "But she needs to understand that you're part of who I am. You're part of our family. And if she can't accept that, then maybe we need to reconsider some things." The silence stretched between the three of them. Finally, Victoria's shoulders sagged slightly, and when she looked at Robert again, there was something different in her eyes. I apologize," she said stiffly. "I was protecting what I thought was best for David." Robert nodded graciously. "We all want what's best for him. Maybe we just need to remember that what's best isn't always what looks best from the outside." David stepped forward and embraced his father for the first time in 3 years. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have called." "I should have visited. I missed you every single day." "I missed you too, son," Robert whispered, holding his boy close. "More than you'll ever know." As they stood there in the afternoon sunlight, Victoria watched them with growing understanding. She was seeing something she had never experienced in her own privileged upbringing. The kind of love that doesn't count the cost. The kind of bond that can survive years of silence and still be stronger than pride. Maybe, she thought, there were some things more valuable than appearances after all.